ASMR Who, and today we're continuing our look through the Big Finish main range, continuing with the second run of 8th Doctor stories. We've got another 3 stories to talk about today, so yeah, let's get into it. We're starting off with Embrace the Darkness, which is written by Nicholas Briggs. And yeah, so this is about it's sort of set on a planet where there's no sun and everything is in darkness. And there's sort of this crew of people who are there to I think they're there to like set up an artificial sun to bring the light back or something. But they are sort of attacked, and these people then, they're attacked by these creatures and they can't see. All they can see is darkness. Until the Doctor and Charley arrive, of course, Paul McGann and India Fisher. All these stories are with Paul McGann and India Fisher, of course. And it's sort of discovered, they meet this sort of robot who tries to kill Charlie because she's got bacteria that could be dangerous or something. And they discovered that these people who've been sort of attacked, it's not just that they can't see. There's a really striking imagery in this, which is a weird thing to say about audio, but the sort of mental imagery, what's happened to these people, which actually I'm not going to say because it's the cliffhanger to part 1, and for good reason, because it's not a big, dramatic action moment, but it's very creepy and weird. And so I thought that was really striking. I also thought it was a fairly strong side cast. It's a very small side cast in this, but especially the character of Orlienza, who's played by Nicola Boyce. Is kind of an arsehole and kind of rude and snarky and cynical, but she's a very strong character and she has a great dynamic with all the others. She's a great sort of rival to the Doctor and Charley. She's not the villain, she's not really an antagonist, she's just she's in a hopeless situation and her personality doesn't necessarily gel with theirs. But I thought she was pretty good. Aside from other sort of specifics of this, I thought it was decent. It's a story that works well on audio because it's about not being able to see. And Charlie gets put through the ringer a little bit in this one, but it kind of, the way all the things work together with these people and this robot system with their base and the creatures in the darkness and this whole planet with no sun and everything, I'm not sure if it all quite came together really strongly. I don't think it's Nick Briggs' strongest story that I've heard so far in the range. And it's not a bad story necessarily, but a little bit unremarkable, I suppose. But that cliffhanger to part 1 will stick with that has stuck with me. And there's not many audio cliffhangers that really stick with you, you know what I mean? Similarly, the cliffhanger to part 3 of Shadow of the Scourge was very strong. But there's not really many that really, really stick in your mind memorably, because you don't have the visuals, So, for something to be that kind of, I was going to say iconic, that's not the word, but for it to be so, notable and memorable, I think that's not without merit, There was a good cliffhanger in Phantasmagoria as well, I seem to recall. But yeah, I just really enjoyed I enjoyed that, and I think that's what I will take from this story, is that cliffhanger and that sort of revelation about what has happened to these people, because it's kind of grim, almost not gruesome, but it's it's quite shocking, but in a good way. But then we move on to the time of the Daleks, which is written by Justin Richards. This one kind of bounced off me a little bit. Of course, it's a Dalek story. It's sort of technically like part 4 of the it's the final story in the is it called Dalek Empire? There's a sort of a mini narrative for the Daleks in the early main range stories that this is part of, if I'm not mistaken, along with the genocide machine, the apocalypse element, and the mutant phase, right? And yeah, this definitely recalls stories like the apocalypse element, and they mention Kasharat, which is the location from the genocide machine. This is about people in the future, sort of, when is it set? Sort of mid to late 21st century, I think. So sort of near future, I want to say. It might be a bit later than that. And basically Shakespeare's gone missing from history. People can't remember him. Charlie doesn't know Shakespeare. But there's some people who do know Shakespeare and they want to go back in time and save him. And also the Daleks want to go and help save Shakespeare. Which obviously is very odd. You do get fun bits of Daleks quoting Shakespeare from that sort of pitch. But yeah, I found this a little bit kind of, what's the word? I don't know. The way these people time travel is through clocks and mirrors. Lots of clocks and lots of mirrors and something like that. And so they travel through a mirror to different times with this master clock that generates the time travel. I don't know. Yeah, this was okay, but it kind of, a lot of the characters were, there's a sort of twist reveal character that it kind of baffles me a little bit. Doesn't quite make sense to me, but and I just felt that the Daleks were a little bit, they were fine, but aside from the quoting Shakespeare, it's stuff you've seen them do before, pretending that they're having an alliance with these people that they're obviously not, and it's not a strong Dalek story in the sense that, there's not iconic Dalek moments in there, I would say. So yeah, this was okay. kind of confused me a little bit. I will say as well, I do always think it's important to mention when and if a story doesn't get my full attention. And while I was paying attention to this, I was also doing other stuff at the time. And this wasn't on in the background, but sometimes you think you're giving it your full attention, but you're not giving it your full attention. That being said, it's not like I didn't pay attention at all, and I felt that this was a little. Sometimes it can be the case that you're not doing anything else that would distract you from the story, but your mind still wanders. I find that anyway. But yeah, I thought that this was an okay story, but not my favourite. And then finally, on to the sort of conclusion, near enough the conclusion of this ongoing 8th Doctor and Charley storyline, the initial storyline, Neverland, which is written by Alan Barnes, who, if I'm not mistaken, wrote Storm Warning, right, the first 8th Doctor Charley story. And yeah, this sort of ties together the threads of, the stuff that the Doctor and Charley keep experiencing paradoxes. At the start of this story, they sort of think that the Time Lords have arrived to deal with the Daleks from the previous story, the way they've been defeated. And it talks about the paradoxes of stories like Seasons of Fear, and it sort of gives context to the framing device of Seasons of Fear and the ending of Seasons of Fear, and explains the sort of paradoxes of the Chimes of Midnight and the Time of the Daleks and stuff like that. You've also got the Gallifrey stories, so you've got Lalla Ward as Romana, and Don Warrington, who you probably do know who he's playing, but I'm not going to tell you because the story treats it as a surprise. It's a reveal. This one's structured a little bit differently. It's in 2 hour-long parts, about an hour and 15 each, and it's 2 parts rather than 4 parts. But yeah, this is a fun story, a decent Gallifrey story. I think sometimes the Gallifrey stories can be a little bit, dry and a bit boring, but this was good fun. You've got fun, Gallifrey characters. Van Sel, who is the character who showed up before, if I'm not mistaken. I want to say in the Apocalypse element. But yeah, this deals with the Celestial Intervention Agency, and I know there's headcanon around that for some people about that being linked to Division from the Chibnall era. But yeah, this was interesting. They go into a universe of anti-time. There's a really kind of high concept idea about what the CIA does to its sort of prisoners. In this, it's quite spooky and creepy. This brings up again the idea of Zagreus, which has popped up a few times. It showed up in a 6th Doctor story. It showed up in Project Twilight, if I'm not mistaken. The 6th Doctor sang it to himself, and the 8th Doctor said it to himself in Seasons of Fear, was it? They bring it up again because it's a Gallifreyan nursery rhyme, and the idea of, Zagreus and the second verse of the Zagreus nursery rhyme, and Zagreus as a character and all this stuff. which of course, if you are familiar with the range, you'll know that story number 50 is called Zagreus, and this story very much ends on a big cliffhanger in leading into that story. Which obviously I'll get to in time, because we've got a bit of the main range yet to go before we hit Zagreus. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I thought it had good concepts. I like Lalla Ward as Romana. I think she's a really fun presence. I don't love Romana's role as president, but Lalla Ward's always good fun to have around. And yeah, you know, this is good moments and a good atmosphere and decent villains, and the way it ends is, you know, it's very dramatic and very kind of almost intense. You know, what the lens the Doctor has to go to win, and the way it recontextualises the framing device from Seasons of Fear was quite unexpected, I thought, but in a good way. Yeah, I enjoyed Neverland. It was good fun. I wouldn't recommend you go into that one first, because it deals with the whole arc of the 8th Doctor and Charley. You kind of need to have listened to the whole run, but for me, who has listened to the whole run, I find it very satisfying. So yeah, those are my thoughts on those 3 stories. Let me know if you listened to them, what you thought. But yeah, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for your time, and I will be back next week. We're going back for one story only. To do one story, give it its own video, because this story has such a high reputation that I'm giving it its own. Also because I'm in terms of working out, you know, numbers for it just works in my head, the way of doing it this way anyway. But also because Spare Parts has such a reputation that I felt it deserved its own video. So join me next week for that, and until then,